Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung was the founding leader of North Korea and one of the most influential and controversial figures of the 20th century. Born in 1912 near Pyongyang, he grew up during Japan's occupation of Korea, a period that deeply shaped his political beliefs. As a young man, Kim joined communist guerrilla forces in Manchuria, fighting against the Japanese army. After World War II, when Japan's empire collapsed, the Korean peninsula was divided. The Soviet Union took control of the north, and the United States occupied the south. Backed by the Soviets, Kim Il-sung rose quickly. In 1948, he became premier of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Are you sure about that?
Establishing a one-party communist state. His goal was to reunify Korea under his rule. In 1950, North Korean forces invaded the south, starting the Korean War. The conflict devastated the peninsula, drew in both China and the United States, and ended in a stalemate in 1953, leaving the country divided to this day. After the war, Kim built a highly centralized dictatorship rooted in personality cult and self-reliance, a doctrine known as juche. He eliminated rivals, controlled every aspect of life, and turned the nation into one of the world's most secretive and militarized societies. Over time, his image became almost godlike. Statues, songs, and slogans glorified him as the great leader. When he died in 1994, Kim Il-sung had ruled North Korea for nearly half a century. His legacy lives on through the dynasty he founded. Power passed to his son Kim Jong-il and later to his grandson Kim Jong-un. To this day, Kim Il-sung remains the country's eternal president, a symbol of absolute authority and the enduring power of his regime. Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was the dictator of Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1945, a man whose ideology and actions brought devastation on a global scale. Born in 1889 in Austria, Hitler moved to Germany as a young man and served in World War I. After the war, he joined the small National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party, and quickly rose to leadership through fiery speeches that exploited Germany's economic crisis, resentment over the Treaty of Versailles, and deep-rooted anti-Semitism. In 1933, Hitler was appointed chancellor, but he swiftly dismantled democracy. He outlawed opposition parties, silenced critics, and built a totalitarian state centered on his cult of personality. Under his rule, propaganda and terror became tools of control. The Gestapo hunted protesters, and Nazi ideology infiltrated every aspect of public life. At the core of his beliefs was a racist vision of a so-called Aryan master race. This led to catastrophic policies of persecution and extermination. Beginning in the late 1930s, Jews, Roma, disabled people, political opponents, and many others were targeted. The result was the Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews and millions of others were systematically murdered. Hitler's aggressive expansionism plunged the world into World War II in 1939 with the invasion of Poland. His armies conquered much of Europe before the tide turned against him. As Allied forces closed in on Berlin in 1945, Hitler took his own life. His dictatorship left tens of millions dead, entire nations in ruins, and a legacy that stands as a warning of how hate, propaganda, and unchecked power can destroy humanity. Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte was one of history's most brilliant and most controversial leaders. Born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, he rose from a modest background to become Emperor of France, reshaping Europe through both reform and relentless warfare. As a gifted military strategist, Napoleon gained fame during the French Revolutionary Wars, when France was surrounded by enemies yet sustained by his victories. By his mid-30s, he had seized power in a coup, becoming first consul in 1799 and later declaring himself emperor in 1804. Napoleon ruled as a dictator, though in a very different way from the totalitarian rulers who came after him. He centralized power completely, censored the press, silenced opposition, and built a government that revolved around his authority. Elections and representative bodies existed mostly for show. His regime promoted loyalty, order, and control, often at the expense of the liberty promised by the French Revolution. At the same time, Napoleon transformed France. His Napoleonic Code established legal equality and merit-based advancement, and his reforms modernized administration and education. But his drive for conquest consumed Europe. The Napoleonic Wars left millions dead and reshaped borders from Spain to Russia. His ambition to dominate the continent ultimately led to his downfall after the disastrous Russian campaign of 1812 and his final defeat at Waterloo in 1815. While Hitler and Kim Il-sung built totalitarian states based on terror, ideology, and mass repression, Napoleon's dictatorship was more pragmatic. It focused on power, glory, and order, rather than racial or political extermination. Yet, like them, them, he placed himself above all institutions and left immense human suffering in his wake. Napoleon died in exile on St. Helena in 1821, leaving behind a complex legacy, part modernizer, part conqueror, and an enduring reminder of how ambition can transform both nations and history itself. Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini was the founder of Italian fascism and the dictator of Italy from 1922 to 1943, a man whose rise marked the beginning of Europe's dark era of totalitarianism. Born in 1883 in northern Italy, Mussolini started as a socialist journalist, but was expelled from the Socialist Party for supporting World War I. After the war, he capitalized on Italy's social unrest, economic hardship, and fear of communism. He founded the Fascist Party in 1919, promoting nationalism, militarism, and the idea that the state should dominate every part of life. In 1922, Mussolini led the March on Rome, a calculated show of force that pressured King Victor Emmanuel III to appoint him prime minister. Once in power, he dismantled democracy step by step, outlawing opposition parties, censoring the press, and using propaganda and violence to control the population. By the mid-1920s, he ruled Italy as Il Duce, or the leader. Mussolini's regime glorified the state, the army, and himself. He promised to restore Italy's ancient greatness, launching massive public works projects and expanding colonial control in Africa. But beneath the grand speeches and parades lay repression, censorship, and brutality. His alliance with Adolf Hitler during World War II proved catastrophic. Italy's military campaigns failed and the country descended into chaos. In 1943, Mussolini was overthrown and later captured by Italian partisans. In 1945, he was executed, ending more than 2 decades of fascist rule. Joseph Stalin. Born in 1878 in Georgia, then part of the Russian Empire, Stalin joined the Bolshevik movement as a young revolutionary. After the 1917 Russian Revolution, he worked his way up the Communist Party's hierarchy, using cunning, manipulation, and violence to eliminate rivals. By the late 1920s, he had consolidated absolute power, becoming the unchallenged leader of the Soviet state. Stalin's rule combined industrial modernization with ruthless repression. His 5-year plans aimed to rapidly industrialize the Soviet Union, turning a rural, agrarian country into a major industrial force. But his policies of collectivization forced millions of peasants off their land, leading to widespread famine, most devastatingly in Ukraine, where millions died in the Holodomor. To maintain control, Stalin built a totalitarian regime based on fear. He launched massive purges in the 1930s, executing or imprisoning anyone he saw as a threat. Party officials, military leaders, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens alike. Millions were sent to Gulag labor camps, where countless people perished. During World War II, Stalin led the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany, ultimately helping to defeat Hitler and reshape Europe's balance of power. After the war, he expanded Soviet influence across Eastern Europe, setting the stage for the Cold War. When Stalin died in 1953, he left behind a nation that was both powerful and traumatized. Saddam Hussein. Born in 1937 near Tikrit, Saddam grew up in poverty before joining the Ba'ath Party, which promoted Arab nationalism and socialist ideals. After years of political maneuvering and violence, he seized full power in 1979, quickly eliminating rivals through purges and public executions. Saddam's rule combined strong nationalism, repression, and fear. His security forces crushed dissent, controlled the media, and used torture and execution to silence opposition. In 1980, he launched a devastating 8-year war against Iran, costing over 1 million lives. Later, in 1990, he invaded Kuwait, provoking the Gulf War and international sanctions that crippled Iraq's economy. To maintain control, Saddam built a cult of personality, presenting himself as Iraq's protector. He used chemical weapons against Kurdish civilians in the 1988 Halabja massacre, one of his regime's worst atrocities. In 2003, a US-led invasion overthrew him, and he was captured later that year. He was tried and executed in 2006. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and feel free to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a future upload. Thanks for watching.